Benedict.
Hello there, very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Face to Face. We're in a time in Sri Lanka where we're looking for development, we're looking for economic recovery, and there are people in the country who are seeing it. There are people who are not really experiencing it at the moment. There are those who have found better employment. There are those who still are unemployed. Where does Sri Lanka really stand as a country at this moment economically? What is the forecast like? We've dedicated quite a lot of time on Face to Face to discuss these matters, and today to discuss more on this we've got with us Dr. Rohantha Athukorala. He is the Vice Chairman of the World Rural Tourism Council. A very good evening, Rohantha, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Shalan, and it's beautiful to once again be with the team here.
So, Rohantha, let's get right into it. Sri Lanka is looking for development in several conventional industries that we have been in for several decades. There is talk of diversification of the kind of exports that we have, the kind of services that we provide, so on and so forth. But at least in the short term, given the fact that we suffered a massive economic crisis, it is a little tough to get into an entirely new area. So of course, there's no surprise that the government, the private sector, fell back on our conventional industries. And one of the most conventional industries in Sri Lanka is the tourism sector. Sri Lanka has been a tourism hub for many, many decades. And before the economic crisis, Sri Lanka was looking at some really massive projections. I believe 2018-19, we were looking at about $5 billion in the tourism industry at that point. But all of that went south after the Easter Sunday attack, and especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, it hit rock bottom. But Rohantha, now again, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what I heard, the forecast is somewhere around 8 billion, I think, even higher than pre-pandemic and pre-economic crisis levels. So let's start a discussion from there. Is the tourism sector really booming as much? And would this massive boom in the tourism sector really translate to real-time economic development in Sri Lanka that can be felt by the people?
See, it's a very interesting argument. The reason is because there was a communique that came out very recently which said that almost like 50 to 60% of the revenue that you earn on tourism is leaked out of the country. And that's something that really concerned, and I suppose the central bank is now studying that in piece of information to see, because end of the day there's no point saying that we are having a revenue of $4 to $5 billion coming in, but physically if it is not coming in into the country. So that's one area that we need to keep in mind. But I think overall around the world what we see is that tourism is a very resilient industry. Resilience in both sides. One is that whenever there is some danger that hits the industry, whether it's man-made or natural, it's the first industry to get hit. So that's from one side. But at the same time, when there's something positive happening, it's the first one that picks up. So we see that happening in Sri Lanka. With regard to the numbers, there was a study which was done about 3.5 years back, where what they did was from 1962 to 1982, they took all the data points, and then you analyze that with the overall global trends that we see, and if so, Shalan, today the tourism industry would have been $12.1 billion, and we would have been touching around 8 million visitors to this country. So that's what was the cost of all these man-made and natural disasters that we saw that has happened in the last maybe 25-30 years. That is the cost of the loss to the Sri Lankan economy. Now the significance of this $12.1 billion which has been developed through this model for Sri Lanka is that it's almost like equivalent to the foreign exchange that you would earn through exports and the foreign exchange that you would earn through remittances. So it just tells you the kind of opportunity that exists in this market, which is worth something like $2.3 trillion globally, and we have a share of like 0.0001% market share.
So speaking of expanding, of course, in this in the tourism industry, we've seen the private sector coming forward, doing a lot of programs, a lot of advertising, marketing, so on and so forth. We also see the government getting involved, even during the government of former President Ranil Wickremesinghe. There were several campaigns that were launched. Now, the success that we are seeing now, is it a result of all these past actions that were taken during previous governments as well to try and boost the tourism sector, or is this is this something else?
See, I think it's a combination of organic plus many efforts of different sectors. A lot of people think that tourism needs to be only done by the government, which is not true, because almost $100 million of expenditure is made by the private sector, because at the end of the day 99% of the industry is private sector driven. So alone they go into countries, promote, they go through exhibitions and conventions, they go and do it on a one-to-one basis, sports teams go, business people go. So the current expenditure that has been estimated in terms of the overall development is about $100 million. Now, has past activity that the government has also done as a policy contributed to this success? For sure. I mean, there's been a lot of work done for the last maybe 20 years by different successive governments, but the fact remains is that we have not been trending around the world, because normally if you're building any brand, you need to have a good communication campaign, and that communication campaign should add up to the campaign that has happened some time back. But here what has happened is we have had so many series of different teams coming out. They would say sun, sea and sand, then you will have So Sri Lanka, then you will have the wonder of Sri Lanka, then continuously there are about 8 different teams that has happened. So what has happened is that we have been building different kinds of identities over time that has not actually contributed to having a strong reason to believe and a reason to come to the country. So that's something that we've had some issues on, and I suppose I always strongly feel that we had a golden opportunity post COVID and the financial crisis when things became zero, and I would call it like we call it in brand marketing to have a clean slate, which you'll never get in your life, never. Where you have a A4 sheet which is blank, and we got that chance where we had to start from zero. So that was an opportunity that we had to really go out there and paint a proper picture to the world, which we lost. And likewise, we lost the opportunity in 2009 to come out with the global campaign. We lost the chance in 2015 when the Yapalnia came in. Everybody said, hey guys, let's go out there and do something good. I was at that time chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, and we had a fantastic team, global ad agencies coming and saying, I'm going to take part in this tender, and they went through the whole process. Within 4 months we put everything onto the table, and we are just about to launch the campaign, and all the chairmen of the corporations were dissolved. Why? Because again,
politics.
And because certain people that the relevant politicians want to be appointed didn't get it, and it was cancelled. So then we lost 2015, we lost 2018, then we had a war hero taking up in 2019. So we thought, okay guys, we are going to have a campaign now, because it's going to be just like how the 2009 war was won. Again it fell on the ground in 2009, and then of 19, then we had 21 and 23, we had this issue. We thought, okay, let's again, now we have a clean slate, go out there. And then subsequently last year we had governance coming in, and we all thought, okay, right, we are up on line. And initially the campaign was supposed to launch in January 2025, then it became March, then it became June 26th, where the date was put and the venue was booked. And it has been a non-starter. So the latest that we have is that within the next 1 year, a new tendering process is going to happen, and a proper launch is going to happen. So I strongly believe it will happen in the current administration. So why is this important? Because if you look at the whole region, all our counterparts are in trouble. I mean, in Pakistan we have political turmoil. In Bangladesh, they're just picking up the pieces after the issues that were there internally. We have Maldives in a financial crisis, and they're trying to see as to how they can avoid it next year. And Nepal is growing at about 2%, and so Sri Lanka is having a 5% GDP growth. So Sri Lanka is, we can see that it is having that poise to become a big player, a strong share of voice in the global marketplace. And if you don't take that advantage now for South Asia, which happens to be the thrust of everybody around the world to say, I want to go to South Asia, I think we will lose this chance.
Speaking of Sri Lanka's exports now, recently there was this entire ruckus about Trump tariffs from the United States. Initially it was 44%, it moved up and down a bit, and finally the statement issued from the White House said, okay, we'll settle at 20%. But however, the government has said that, there isn't still a solid agreement. There is no free trade agreement or anything put down on pen and paper with that regard. But however, it seems as if the book on that has been closed, because nobody seems to be talking about that anymore. What has this really, how has this impacted Sri Lanka's exports? How will this impact Sri Lanka's exports? Of course, given that the United States is our biggest market as far as goods exports are concerned.
See, two very important points on this, Shalan. The first is that, I think the best thing that could have happened to Sri Lanka is this kind of disruption that is happening in the global marketplace, because that has made us to think back and ask ourselves, how do we diversify our export basket? That's first question. Second is that we are also got us to think the amount of different para tariffs that are in play, which makes us so uncompetitive in the global marketplace. So I think I look at it positively. Now, the reason why the information is not on the ground is because there is a non-disclosure agreement which is there. So currently whatever being discussed happens to be in closed doors. But we know that the latest data coming out from a model that was done by IPS, Institute for Policy Studies, says that there is about a hit of about $638 million in the current model. It's very clear coming out. So now the question is that how do you play that game? So when you say it's a hit on about $600 million US, we're going to lose out on it? Currently what they're saying is that you become incompetitive to the extent that you will lose a revenue of $638 million.
But 20% is among the lowest. I think the only lower tariff than 20% was 15% as far as I saw. And judging by Sri Lanka's peers, I don't know anyone who has a lower tariff percentage to the United States specifically than Sri Lanka.
Yeah, you're right.
So wouldn't that put us on, on a better competitive edge? Maybe even people who are purchasing apparels, which is one of our lead exports to the United States from Bangladesh or Pakistan, would, set their sights on Sri Lanka.
Yeah. See, it's a net that you're taken, because you have the seafood sector which is going to get impacted. You have the rubber sector and the apparel sector. So altogether, when you take the net is what the model is doing, that is about at 638 million. But then from another side, we have got a huge plus win factor coming from the UK. Because UK is saying that you have your zero tariffs going in, and separately they have also taken this origin where we import, and then with such import that you do add value added and send to the UK. Now they are saying that even if it's 100% imported, they'll be yet applied for that 0% VAT. So, so there are benefits that are coming.
So there will be countries or companies that would want to divert their exports from Sri Lanka to gain that 0% tax advantage.
You will have a net gain overall. So I mean, also what we have to keep in mind is that our exports are at about 16.7 billion last year, and this year's target is about 20 billion. But if you look at the current growing pattern, I would say that we will hit about 19 billion, 18.7, 19 billion. Unless, of course, we have a huge thrust in the month of October and November and December that can take us to 20 billion. So we'll be falling a little bit short on our exports. But then the good news is that, it has given us a wake-up call. And we know that even though the European markets and the US markets are almost 50-55% of our total export basket, we have to keep in mind that those markets are growing at 2.5 to 3%. While if you take our exports to the African continent, it's growing at 35%. Even if you take our exports to India, it's growing at 31%. So this has got us to think and saying, why don't we go and have stronger drive to the African market, set up our own trade offices, not only just in South Africa, but in other parts like the Ethiopias of the world, and see as to how we can have a better thrust on our sectors over there. And then, of course, to look at as to how we can get deeper with regard to the Indian FTA. So, I mean, I think overall, yes, there is a little bit of what shall I say, flux in the market in terms of saying, how do I balance this? But I think the net gain would be is that it made us to relook at as to how we need to start driving strategy.
Rohantha, you spoke about the Sri Lanka-India FTA. Now, Sri Lanka has FTAs with several countries. One thing that I clearly remember is Sri Lanka's FTA with Singapore. But during the past as well, there were allegations that, this is not really being implemented. I mean, there are so many goods and items that have been listed where we would have tax-free access to Singapore and vice versa. But nothing really seems to be implemented practically. It's just a piece of paper. So how do we get past that hurdle and really materialize this into tangible development for Sri Lanka?
See, very good question, because we just go and sign papers not understanding whether we actually have our products to go there. For example, I mean, if I go back before even Singapore, the FTA with Thailand, I mean, Thai economy is something like a 480 billion economy. Even after you sign an FTA, even if it's operational, there's no products for us to market into what Thailand
definitely require. Not products that could be marketed competitively.
Absolutely. And I mean, like for example, chips. They import about billions of chips because they are the largest producer of semiconductors. But the question is that we have not ramped ourselves in terms of setting up an industrial zone to get chip manufacturers going. So we have not looked at those strategic partnerships. But the answer to your question, Chalan, I strongly agree with what you're saying. Let's first look at our two fundamental FTAs, which happens to be the Indian FTA and the Pakistan FTA. We already have a free trade agreement with the US and Europe, which is operational in nature and driven by the apparel industry. But of course, you have the the seafood industry and the rubber industry also, that has kicked onto it. So if I look at a big opportunity, it's India. And India, as we all know, their import bill for a year is something like 702 billion. And our exports to India is around $850 million, which means that we are at a 0.0012% of the overall basket. So given the friendship that is there between these two countries, and we know that some of the products that we have has an ideal fit to the import basket of India, I think deeper cuts are required. And I think, like you very rightly said, if you want to operationalize the FTA, the best FTA to drive maybe a comprehensive economic partnership, and then maybe to look at how services also are going to be involved. I think India is the best. You have 400 million Indians who are in the upper income groups of that country, and if you can target our products there, we have two good brands which are already there. They have shown the way that Sri Lankans can penetrate the Indian market. So now the question is as to how these deeper cuts can come to play. And I think rather than the private sector here, the policy makers will have to take a high ground, and and I think that's where the challenge is. And most people are asking, what were the 6 agreements signed at the last visit?
So on that note, we'll cross over to a short commercial break, and we'll be back with more on the other side. Stay tuned. You're watching Face to Face.
Newsfirst, Face to Face with Shalan Benedict.
මං සෙට් කරපු දේ තමයි වෙන්නේ. ඒක අනිවාර්යෙන් වෙනවා සිස්.
මං කියන්නේ අර කරන් මෙතනින් බැන්නට පස්සේ සෑහෙන කාලයකට එළියට එන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ. බෝඩි මරියන්නේත් නෑවා.
තාත්තගේ ජීවිතේ නැති උනේ මේක විසඳන්න ගිහින්. තාත්තා වැටුණු තැනින් මං නැගිටිනවා.
මට නම් හිතෙන්නේම මේකට මොකක් හරි සිකියුරිටි සිස්ටම් එකක් ඇති කියලා බ්‍රෝ.
උනාට ඉතින් මං ගත්ත කියලා තේමිය දැනගත්තේ නෑනේ.
ඌ දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා ඔබ කොහොමද දන්නේ? කවුද දන්නේ? ඌ දැනගෙන දන්නේ නැහැ වගේ ඉන්නවද?
අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
අපි ඇත්තරම නපුරු පිටසක් කොලෙක් මේ ලෝකෙට ගෙන්නමු.
හවස පාමාට්ටම ගෙන්නමුද?
දැන් ඉක්මනටම නපුරු පිටසක් කොල ජීවින් හොයන්න ඕනේ.
මේ ඔයා යාට තේරුම් කරන්නකෝ.
හැමදාම හවස පහයිතියටනේ කිව්වේ.
ගන්නවත මට පෙන්නනවා තමුන්ගේ හැඳුනුම්පත.
ඇයි අනේ සෙමි බොයි කිව්වම හැමෝම දන්නේ.
ඔයා හිතන්නේත් මං හිතපු දේවද?
මොනවාද නංගි හිතා ඉන්නේ හැමදාම පහයිතියට සිරස ටීවී බලන්න.
සෙමි බොයි
සතියේ දිනවල හවස 5:30ට සිරස ටීවී ඔස්සේ.
පුතේ මට බයක් දැනෙනවා. වෙනදා දැනෙච්ච නැති විදිය බය.
මෙච්චර කාලයක් උන්ට ඕන විදියට නටන්න තියලා හිටියා. ඒක වැරදි රේ. උන්ට අතින් පස්සේ මේ මහ පොළොවේ ජීවත් වෙන්න අයිතියක් නැහැ.
එකක් මතක තියාගන්න. මම රොකීගේ මල්ලි. ඊපස්සේ අපිලා බලමු.
රොකී chapter 2 අද රාත්‍රී 8ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Newsfirst, Face to Face with Shalan Benedict.
Welcome back. You're watching Face to Face. We're in discussion with Dr. Rohantha Athukorala. Rohantha, we were speaking about Sri Lanka's economy, the tariffs that were imposed by the United States. Of course, we spoke about the tourism sector, as we always do. We were touching on, the diversification of Sri Lanka's export basket. Now, when I watch some of the programs and some of the experts on this subject speak, the sentiment that they keep on echoing is the fact that, Sri Lanka can't now try to enter the car manufacturing market or the cell phone manufacturing market, because that ship sailed long time ago. It will be extremely hard to impossible to enter those markets at this point of time, given, Sri Lanka's size, the economy, and of course our current predicament. So the only way that Sri Lanka can really diversify our exports and of course our expertise, what we're really good at as a country, is by looking to the future. So, Rohantha, with your years of experience, would you agree with that sentiment? And what is the practical way? Because everybody says Sri Lanka needs to expand their export basket. Yes, okay, we understand. But how do we do that practically?
See, the reality is that our problem is not to do with demand. Demand is out there. Our problem is to do with our supply chain. That is our biggest problem.
We're not integrated to the global supply chain. Is that what you're saying?
Our supply chain is small.
Our supply chain is small. Okay.
So what happens is that even when you get an order in terms of the consistency of the product and the consistency of the supply chain going in, you cannot guarantee. That's the reality. Now, I would look at the answer to Sri Lanka's economic problem in a different way. I mean, if you take 52% of Sri Lanka's economy are small medium enterprises. Now, the SME sector, we are doing a large project with Rotary right now, where we are going into all parts of the country. Each of the clubs are tying up with certain chambers, whether it be the Women's Chamber, the National Chamber of Exporters, the Ceylon Chambers, the Federation of Chambers, AmCham, ICTA, different trade chambers, and we pick up the top 50 of the SMEs and we see as to how we can pick up the top 10 on a one day's interaction and see whether those 10 can be looked at in terms of driving the global market. So a typical one day program will include, how do you drive your market in terms of expanding your market, how do you expand your business, what is the access of finance that is there, what are the different types of finance options that are there, taking a success story where somebody explains how even different very difficult times, how they grew. So today we have met about 220 SMEs from Gaul to Kurunegala to Jaffna, AmCham chambers, ICTA, so that they were like specific. And our pickup is very simple. Number one is that it is not a finance issue that they have. There's enough options of access to finance. There are government schemes which they have allocated 15 billion. The uptake is only like about 3.5 to 4 billion. There's a current scheme funded by ADB where up to 25 million, 67% of the collateral is given free. So it's not an access to finance which is issue. What is important is a typical SME doesn't have the kind of network in terms of where they can leverage it by using iron fist. What I mean by iron fist is a mentor. So what SMEs actually want is a mentor. I'll give you a classic example. There is one lady who manufactures life jackets from Gaul, and she's doing pretty good. She comes to a retail outlet in Havelock Town, sells it for about 2,800 rupees, and they retail it to the consumer at 6,000 rupees.
Okay.
She supplies the same product to a particular a trader in Peta. She sells it for about 5,600, 5,700 rupees, and this guy puts a seal on it and exports it to Vietnam for 17,000.
Okay.
So now we met her in one of these Rotary conclaves. We call it the Rotary SME conclaves, and then we are a service organization. So what we did was we said, let's see as to how you can go direct. And for you to go direct, you need to have a Sri Lanka standards certification. So we facilitated that meeting, spoke to the Sri Lankan embassy in UK, got down the standards which are fit there. Right now the Sri Lanka standards is developing that certification process in Sri Lanka, and then once this person gets this endorsement, she's already got an order in UK. So now what did we do? We did not give access to finance. we didn't go out there and say you need to ramp up your operations. But all what we did was that, being a service-oriented organization, held the SME's hand in terms of getting into that marketplace. So what Sri Lanka requires is, rather than looking at these large quantum leaps of what needs to be exported to another country, what we need to look at is, look at our SME basket, which contribute to 50% of our GDP. So if our economy is going to be $100 billion this year, $100 billion, 50 billion of that comes from the SME sector. So what we need to do is understand all the different actors in stage, see how they can partner this SME sector and move that into a global interface. And let's not look at big volumes. Let us see whether we can give a consistent product. Let's look at whether we can feed in a supply chain which is consistent, so that we make sure that our product is always there on the shelf. Because otherwise what happens is, your product is on the shelf, next month doesn't happen, and then when a competitor gets in, you cannot dislodge that from a shelf in the global market. So if we do this properly, I think we are doing what is right. And Shalan, one point I really like to highlight here is that we are at tipping point in Sri Lanka, because our economy is going to be $100 billion economy. And research shows that any economy which is 100 billion GDP is valued as a brand 100 billion. And they say when a economy crosses 100 billion point, it tends to propel into a value proposition globally, which attracts better FDIs, more stronger SME markets in terms of exports, and you attract better clientele for tourism. So I think we need to use this particular sweet spot, which has been proven through research, and see how we can make our SME stronger. And if we can say within the next 3 years, we want to make our SMEs contribute to $100 billion, because currently they are about $50 billion, and make this whole economy 150 billion in the next 3 years. I think that's a kind of orientation which is required, which is not big stories, but it's small steps that can be done. I'll give you another case in point. We were doing this forum in Jaffna, and there was this, we were sitting around a table, and I asked this guy, so what do you do? He says, I supply wines, and what I do is I take toddy and develop wines. So I said, I mean, okay, nothing fancy about it, so I said, so my colleague said, I think I want to test it. So he said, I'm sorry, I can't give you. So we were like kind of taken aback, and we asked him, what do you mean? He said, no, right now it's been patented by WIPO. He has a world intellectual property certification on his wines, and he has a Google certification also on intellectual property.
Okay.
So now I asked him, so what are you doing about it? He said, let me show you WhatsApp. And a big name from India is in touch with him, and he wants to get global rights for distribution of his product. So now we quickly intervened, and we said, we will mentor you, and we will help you as to how you can go into the global market. So I think these are just two cases in points, one from Gaul, other one from Jaffna, which just tells you the kind of talent and the skill that is there in Sri Lanka. It's just that we don't have a modus operandi of hand holding, and that's something that we need to do. And if we do this properly, and we say that in the next 3 years we are going to be an economy which is from 100 to go up to $150 billion, I think we'll be in very good state.
Rohantha, now we know that political stability in the country also really plays a key role in predicting how the economy will turn. We saw when there was massive political instability in the country investor confidence dipped low. Now that new government is in power, they've been given power across the board with the presidency, parliament, local government bodies. How important is political stability to ensuring the kind of development that we are looking at really materializing in the country? Is it absolutely vital? Could any political hiccups along the way really deter the momentum that we have now begun to gain?
See, there's a 3-year window right now. I mean, we know that there's 159 power voting base right now in parliament, and it's a 2/3 majority. And we know that in terms of passing strong legislation is possible. So I think that is in favor of the country. Number 2 is that we see that the governance structure is very strong, and that's something that was a huge issue for IMF. When IMF came in 2021, 2022, what was happening is that the first thing that was done was a diagnostic index, and that it found that this was done after 40 years in Asia, and they found that Sri Lanka is one of the worst offenders of governance, or in other words, we are a corrupt country. So
IMF didn't have to really tell us that, we knew that.
But at least now it's documented, because normally what happens, Shalan, is it's a perception. Everybody says,
and everybody calls it false allegations.
Yes, but now it is there on paper, and they are given a 16-point plan to implement. And simple things. Every politician must declare the assets. If there is a tender, it must be there on the net for everybody's access. The person who wins is also there, and the logic given. Very simple things. So I think
no unsolicited bids.
Absolutely. So what happens is that these are things.
So, but the argument was, I mean, I remember with regard to unsolicited bids, they always kept on saying, this unsolicited bid is specially catered to Sri Lanka. We get a massive advantage, a huge cut. It's better than going for, tender process. That was the kind of argument that was given. That never really is the reality, is it?
Well, maybe theoretically, but in practice, it has not given the benefits. Otherwise, we won't be a bankrupt country, no? Right? So at least now you have a government who says, I'm trying to work on this platform. And I think our job from civil society and from the private sector is we need to support that agenda. We know that the next 3 years there is at least consistency of the government which is in power. So strong legislation can happen, which includes education reforms. Now, I was involved in the whole University Grants Commission strategic plan for the next 5 years. We just finished it, and we see some very clear strategic interventions taking place. Like, for instance, every university will be linked to certain industries, so that if any research project is required from the private sector, they get in touch with the university, they would do the research, and that opportunity is there where the university students have a chance of showing their skill set to the private sector and to be hired.
Okay.
So that platform is now
building that bridge.
Yeah, not that it wasn't there, it was there, but the formalization is stronger. And secondly is that we are saying that there should be an arm that takes the good ideas and quickly moves it into a patency. So it's not publishing papers at meetings and conferences, but move it more into intellectual property and patency, so that then you sell the patency, you commercialize it, and then you'll have the companies that come and set up operations in terms of industrial zones. So now that bridge is right now done with regard to the connecting of the dots. So now the question is that we have to make sure that that armory is implemented, and when you have 2/3 majority in parliament, you can push the agenda stronger, and with that you see research and technology coming into play to the private sector, which gives you efficiency of 2x. So that's a model that was used in South Africa. That was the model that was used in South Korea. And that is the model that was used in Singapore. So we need to now ask ourselves, you know, getting into those fundamentals, doing the right thing at the fundamental stage, so that then we can see as to how this economy, which is 100 billion, can be pushed up to 150 billion. So two key things. Export industry is working on its own. They have an agenda. We know there's an armory behind that has to look at the free trade agreements. The tourism sector, we know that you need a global campaign, and there's a commitment by the government that it to be done within the next year. You know, driving SMEs is absolutely pivotal, and that should be mainly through this mentorship scheme, and then of course link in the education sector reforms together with the university system. I think, you know, Sri Lanka is actually poised for a strong takeoff.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, for joining us on our program today, and of course shedding light on all of these possibilities for Sri Lanka. Of course, there are still things that are in the pipelines, of course, positives for Sri Lanka, looking forward, looking towards a developed country, and it is the duty and responsibility of each and every one of us, of course, to do our little part and try to develop ourselves and contribute to the greater economy as a whole. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Rohantha, for joining us on our program today. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. Our time has come to an end. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Face to Face with